She was just sitting on the fence. I just give her a wee push.
We're live, honey.
We're live now. We'll find out what Union was talking about later. Hello and welcome. I'm John from Broadsheet, and this is the 21st or 22nd series or episode in a series of shows looking at the Mother and Baby Home Report and the and factors around that. We're joined by Tuam activist Breda Murphy, fellow Tuam activist Frank Breheny, and adoptee and activist Union Duffy. Hi guys.
Hi John.
How are you?
We haven't seen each other for a few weeks, and there's been so much. Breda, do you want to start? I mean, with the Sapone stuff, the Catherine.
Yeah, a lot has happened in the last few weeks. We have met with the minister in that time as well. We've been waiting for a meeting for a long time, and it was postponed. So on meeting him, it became clear really that he had nothing new to tell us other than, you know, the legislation for the burials bill will come before the Dáil soon, and that they expect there's no time scale for beginning the works in June. For the redress scheme, they're opening it up in 2022. But I reminded him on, you know, the work that Ewan and Frank and myself have done on the burials bill, and the fact that the coroner and Galway County Council are an integral part of that, because if they dismiss those, as they've done with the Commission of Investigation and appointing an agency, which appears to be the manner in which they want to go, then that agency will again dissolve and we will have nowhere to go. There'll be judicial reviews lined up. So yeah, then Sapone Gate, I suppose, over the last, really, it's 8 weeks. And who would have thought, you know, that it would continue on without somebody in government calling a halt. I mean, first of all, at the cabinet table, to think that you've all of these people who are learned, who are experienced, who hold a significant portfolio, and not one of them questioned the manner in which former Minister Sapone was being given this gig, and seemed to approve it. So that really kind of floored us in the beginning. And then I suppose, you know, I began emailing, and I've emailed as late as today. I'm constantly on to, you know, the ministers and the Taoiseach. And I find it incredible, even to the point, and I did ask the minister with regard to, on the 10th of January, they were, the Mother and Baby Home Report was leaked to the Sunday Independent, Jodie Corcoran. And that investigation is now 9 months underway. And yesterday in Dáil Éireann, but I'd asked the minister anyway when he was with us, but in Dáil Éireann, he was asked, the Taoiseach was asked on a number of occasions about it. And he responded that he didn't take part in the investigation, but that he suggested he had information, but he wasn't willing to share it, and he will not share it. So I wrote to him to ask, you know, our people are injured by this information. It affects them directly, to the point that I made a complaint to the press ombudsman and followed through on it. And surely they're entitled to that information as to who leaked that information from. Again, there was only a handful of people who would have had it. And because the government now have that information, why don't they release it? So, you know, the whole thing is, I don't think it's over. I think the government want to draw a line in the sand and say, this is it, and we've moved on. But how do you move on by just saying, you know, I'm sorry, and not being contrite and not making any semblance to truth, to accountability, to transparency?
So they know who leaked the document, but they're obviously not going to say, but they're not even going to say how it happened.
No. It has to be some senior member of cabinet. And, you know, we can speculate, but at the end of the day, I think those who are affected by that information deserve an apology from that person directly.
Yeah. What benefit, I mean, I know it's getting ahead of a story, but what benefit was that leak? It seems such a kind of meaningless leak, if you know what I mean. It didn't really sort of help the story, their version either. You know, it backfired in anything.
Yeah, I think this government have been one who've had leaks all the time, and it's kind of when they're giving us bad news, and that wasn't a good news story. They often drip feed information, so they're pre-preparing us in a way for what might be coming down the line. The fifth interim report is a much better document than the final report. And the sad reality is that many people, including those into the future in 20 years' time, who are researching, will possibly disregard the fifth interim report. You know, so it's things like that, and it's the fact that Mairead Enright, who you spoke to, you know, has taken apart the executive summary. But it's an ongoing fiasco, really, and even to the point where the Magdalene women who were awarded redress, you know, and back in 2013, and the special card for medical needs to be addressed, and those would mean that they could go to private facilities and they could have therapies such as acupuncture or massage or anything, alternative therapies really. And that was to come down the line for the Magdalene women, and that really hasn't happened. And only half of the budget for the redress scheme for the Magdalene women of the 58 million has been spent. So half of the budget approximately for the Commission of Investigation report has been spent. So we're on the same foot, really. You know, if they haven't delivered to the Magdalene women some 7 years on, they're unlikely to deliver to mother and baby home survivors. They haven't even done the redress package, you know.
Yeah, I don't want to dump on Catherine Zappone more than she's been dumped on the last few weeks, but she's the position. The UN position was a reward for her presumably stalling any report on the mother and baby homes as well, because I think Tuam was on her watch. And the fact that the remains are still interned.
I told the minister that, you know, 5 of us sat in front of him from our membership. I told him I'm absolutely disgusted that if somebody told me 7 years ago we would still be here, and that I reminded him of the Canadian situation and the remains of children recovered there in a short period of time and reinterred appropriately. And it's just been a continuous injustice. And I suppose Minister Zappone, to my mind, wrote her own job description or whatever, because that post is not available now. And nobody knew it was available. So it was never advertised. And I think she herself now has to come and answer some questions. And I'm not really clear that she doesn't have a position from Foreign Affairs already on the UN that she did have up until last October. So I'm not sure if that's, you know, put to bed and this was another one. But certainly it's highly suspect. And, you know, I've met her many times and I was one of the ones who would have thought, you know, we would have justice now. And, you know, I don't ever believe power brokers. I think we always have to question what they say and how they say it. And we found out nothing by meeting the minister, really. We found out nothing new, but he did see the site, and that's important. He hadn't seen the site before then.
Right. What did he say about when he said that about Catherine Zappone?
What did he say about?
When you said what you said there about Catherine Zappone to Roderick O'Gorman, what did he say? Did he acknowledge that?
I didn't say all of that. We talked about Tuam. Well, we talked about the fact that 7 years on, we don't have justice. We don't have any
that's what I mean.
And that the manner in which the government are I did say that we are totally, or rather, I'm completely disgusted. And in that room were Principal Officer James Gibbs, Wendy Doyle, who's the Assistant Principal Officer, the Minister, and he was joined by Minister Anne Rabbitte. And there were 5 of us. And, you know, it was cordial. I mean, we have to meet them, we have to engage. But we left them under no illusion that we are so dismayed and disgusted, is the word I used, by the manner in which they behave. We don't deserve this type of treatment.
Ewan, how are you?
All right, John. All right, thanks. What about yourself?
Not too bad. Actually, be better. But from the north, when you're looking at the Sapone situation and all that, does it seem just mystifying, or are you following it closely in terms of what you're at up north?
Well, I try and keep abreast of all the affairs in the Republic, John, because I mean everything that's going on down there, it's not a separate universe or anything. I mean, the same sort of dodgy characters, the same sort of political incompetence in terms of leaks, etc., etc. I mean, it goes on up here as well. I mean, we had the same sort of leak before our academic research was published on the 26th of January. The only thing is, it was actually worse because we actually found out within days who actually leaked it, and it was a prominent member of, in fact, it was the chairperson of the Interdepartmental Working Group that actually leaked the contents. Not all of the contents, but certain aspects of it.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, nobody batted an eyelid. So, I mean, the important thing is here that in terms of, just like ourselves, I mean, the victims and survivors in the south of Ireland were exactly the same. So the government are telling you, listen, we've done a report, whatever type of report it is, whether it's research or it's a commission, whatever the case may be, and they're giving this false sense of empowerment to the people infected that, listen, we think you guys deserve to see this report before anybody else does. So you're falsely raising expectations of hopes, and you're luring people into false senses of security and letting them think, oh, we're actually being given a wee bit of agency here, something we've either never had or we've had very little of in our entire lives. And the government looks like it's actually trying to do the right thing. So there's a certain aspect of morality and ethics and values and principles, and if there's any such thing as scruples in this here. So for it to be absolutely turned over to a newspaper in whatever respect, I mean, the other points to that are, what are the repercussions of doing that? I mean, why are these leaks continually being leaked, especially in the circumstances that they were? I mean, what's the punitive measures? Are they going to upgrade their security? Are they going to do anything to make sure it doesn't happen again? I mean, they just leave it on the hope that nobody else is going to bring it up again.
And was the leak sort of damaging in a way? Was it the most negative, distorted sort of image of the report? Was it that when the press ran it? I mean, when they leaked
in the north.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was one of the more prominent newspapers ran it, and I found out. And I rang the journalist that wrote the article, and I asked them, would they do a counter statement to actually talk about the prominence of the person that leaked it and what had happened and the damage that it again done to victims and survivors. I mean, we were given all sorts of security measures that we'll give you the report the morning or the day before, 24 hours before it's released, and we don't want this going out to anybody, etc., etc. But I mean, the prominent actors actually thought it was okay to release certain aspects of it, and I mean, it started to ask all sorts of questions because there are certain aspects of it, as you can imagine. For example, it had said that there was no evidence of any drug and vaccine trials in the north, and because of what was again directly happening in the south of Ireland, people had already been starting to ask questions about the north. I mean, why would the similar institutions, be any different in the north than they are in the south? So it meant, well, my God, we find that strange. No evidence at all of drug and vaccine trials up here, and yet they've happened on such a consistent basis for a long period of time in the south of Ireland. But in effect, I mean, those drug and vaccine trials have taken place, and I mean, I highlighted that in one of your shows a number of months ago, because I've had that sort of correspondence with GlaxoSmithKline as well. But yes, John, at the end of the day, I mean, we have to keep an eye on everything that's going on in the Republic, and certainly when it comes to cronyism and political nepotism, patronage, I mean, nobody should be surprised that this sort of carry on goes on at any level, and especially when some politicians, not all of them, but some, or maybe most, when they go over to the dark side and start to raise their profile and career and go further up the ladder in terms of what sort of offices they hold, I mean, nobody should be under any illusion that a lot of these people will do anything and everything within their power to circumvent what's meant to be the decent thing.
Frank, I was going to say to Breda earlier that I've noticed there's a lot more activism around the mother and baby homes at the moment, isn't there? I don't know if you've noticed it, Breda and Ewan and Frank, but I've seen a lot of stuff coming in and photographs, and like there is some kind of, there is a movement building, really, isn't there? Frank, would you say? I mean, I know there were some developments in High Park where your mother was.
Yeah, grandmother.
Sorry, grandmother.
No, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, it's. I think, I mean, coming back, I'll answer the point you're making, but I think coming back to the leak itself, as I remember when it was leaked, my first impression was that this was a cohort, you know, and the media, in some respects, and TDs in some respects were part of it, were seeking, and in fact they did seek to get their first punch in. And you know, we saw some pretty awful articles and tweets and stuff like that in the days leading up to the point, and indeed beyond the actual official publication of the report. And I think it's something we've talked about before, which is, you know, he who controls the narrative apparently controls the high ground. And, you know, but I mean, you know, why should I, you know, sort of pile in on this? You know, I mean, I live in the world capital of, the colander of leakage in this country. And, you know, in some respects, where I sit, you know, to hear that yet another document has been leaked is, you know, not.
We lost you there for a second, Frank. You froze.
All right, sorry. Yes, I was saying that, you know, to hear that a leak is being carried out is of no surprise to me, and that kind of is a reflection. It's actually quite shocking hearing myself speak that out loud. That we become so blasé, as it were, about this kind of methodology. So I think it is about that, but of course it backfired spectacularly once the report was actually released, because it was a bit of a slow burn, as I seem to remember, because, I mean, I was reading the report and I was thinking, I just can't believe that, you know, that there is a notable journalist in the Republic describing this document as a solid legal document. And it was anything but, you know, it wasn't even worthy of a charge sheet wrap, the way that it was drafted, the way that it was put together. And I think it has struck an immense chord, if you like. It struck an immense chord with the Irish public. And indeed, the global public, you know, that these reports, these consistent reports about whether it's about industrial schools or Magdalen laundries and now mother and baby homes, is ploughing its way forward. And as Breda has pointed out, you know, for many people, matters haven't been resolved in some of those past reports or legacies. No wonder people are getting angry about this and angry about the fact that there are so many bodies out there, you know, lying in the grounds, where we don't understand, you know, the history of those bodies. We don't understand how they've ended up in there. And I mean, I've been doing some of the work on another matter, and the one thing that struck me, and it kind of strikes at the heart of this, is actually what appears to be going on here in the Irish Republic is this reliance on the constitutional points that appears in the Irish Constitution about public order and morality, and how public order and morality is, if you like, the block from allowing rights to be enjoyed. And, you know, I've been following through on the academic research on that and realizing that that it's not just Ireland, but it's also other countries who use these kind of public order morality kind of clauses in order to keep the lid on, if you like, on potential liability of the state, or indeed of the actors or the parties that help the state.
And free speech.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, the European Court of Human Rights doesn't really help on this because, you know, it talks about, it applies what they call the doctrine of the margin of appreciation. In other words, the state knows best. And I think if you have that boiling away in the background, enshrined into a constitution, which provides these limits on rights. Everybody sees a constitution and think, oh, I've got rights. But there's actual, you know, real blocks to those rights within the constitution. And this goes right back, you know, to 1922.
Yeah.
You know, you can see it very clearly there. And I think there is a mindset within the Irish political class, possibly even the media class, who believes that, you know, for the fluidity of society, you know, we have to put limits on. We have to kind of draw a line in the sand, if you like, on certain things that can happen. But what I would say to them is that you can't have it all your own way. Because there is an argument of proportionality and has always been there. And let's not forget, you know, back to the Declaration of Independence, there was a contract made by the founding fathers in Ireland, basically said, you will have this and we will give you this if you support us in our quest for independence. And you as Irish men and Irish women will enjoy this. But unfortunately, that contract didn't carry forward. But as I say, it doesn't matter which part of the world you go to, many European countries have these public order and morality clauses within constitutions or within their laws, which apparently gives them free rein to do what they want to do. But as I say, with that kind of background going on, you've got, if you like, different classes of people who are in power who clearly believe that this is their get out of jail free clause card. And you know, that they can design, they can influence, they can manipulate in the way that they do. But at the core of all of this, and you know, this is something that I really do believe in, you know, it's not just about individual rights, but it's about the dignity of the human being.
Yeah, on that point though, Frank, I mean, and Breda and Ewan, why isn't it possible to get more religious people involved? You know, if you can, the problem is that it's seen as groups, even this discussion will be seen as anti-church. It's not, of course. And I think that's been always a problem in Ireland, because they're instinctively defensive around mother and baby homes and industrial schools and all that. But I don't know if we can sit down with them and explain that this is not about destroying your church. It's about, unless you sort this stuff out, your church isn't worth.
Yeah, and we spoke to Archbishop Eamon Martin on that, and Archbishop Michael Leary, and I think many times they understand, you know, because they see the dwindling numbers in their churches, and they see the lack of regard that people now hold for the type of rhetoric that ruled Ireland. You know, at the time of mother and baby homes in my own parish, families were denounced from the altar in my local church. like, to think that that happened and that others who were their friends were almost forced to ostracize them or to think of them as different. I think the church is realizing, and it is an avenue that we should be. When we held our meeting with the minister, one of the people present was Teresa, our member, and she said that she would look forward to a time when around the table there would be all of the voices that were connected to mother and baby homes, be they the local council, the church itself, parish priest or whatever, and bishop, and the religious orders that ran those institutions, and the residents of the areas where they have maintained the site, particularly in Tuam, for so many years. And many people there are still quite religious, and within our grouping are still quite religious and go to church or watch church now, maybe due to COVID. But yeah, faith is important to many people of that age profile. And I think we can't ignore that. And the church needs to be more cognizant of being honest, giving their files, handing over the archives that they must have. I mean, nobody kept records like the church kept records. They were meticulous.
Oh, yeah,
and, to say they are lost or indeed for, Galway University for the 1930s, when the children's remains were being, and remains of adults were being accepted into the anatomy department, to have lost those records and say they don't exist. I mean, you do wonder, but that's institutions for you. They tend to, and it's the same thing with the government. They tend, we've seen it yesterday evening, they circle the wagons, and those who speak out are once again ostracized to a point. But I think we're gaining some ground, but it's slow. How long can we hold out for justice, really?
The church is institutionally flawed. And I think the problem with the church is that they don't see this as two distinct arguments. There is the argument of spirituality, and nobody would challenge, their high ground, if you like, on spirituality. Nobody would challenge people who follow that spirituality. But the problem here is dogma. And dogma is founded in the practices within the institution of the church. This has been centuries old. My grandmother, for example, became a consecrate, and her name was Magdalene of St. Isidore. And St. Isidore is apparently the patron saint of the internet, as I recently discovered, because he was such a great academic and a theologian and a lawmaker. But I'm going back to the Middle Ages here, John, so sorry about this. But in the Council of Toledo, he was responsible for drafting and enacting Canon 60, which was giving power to the Catholic Church at that time to remove children from Jewish people and to educate them or re-educate them in the Christian faith. Now, for me, that's quite shocking that my grandmother had that name. Yeah. And the ironies are piling up as I discovered it. But within that history of Isidore and all the other Isidores out there is the quest, the institutional quest, to deliver a dogma, a purity of blood, if you like. I think the Spanish is limpieza de sangre, which was a policy that was adopted way, way back over the centuries. And you can trace this dogma, this practice of dogma changes, even in this situation, with the Republic of Ireland. Its roots go back to the papal encyclicals of the 1890s and beyond.
Yeah. Coming up today, more to date, though, I mean, we're possibly looking at a Sinn Fein-led government whenever that happens, whenever an election happens, but say between the next 3 or 4 years. Ewan, up north, do you get a lot of respect or cooperation from Sinn Fein? And then Breda, what do you think about long term in terms of getting, redress and stuff like that through Sinn Fein? Ewan first.
Well, I've been long saying now, unfortunately, that Sinn Fein have a completely partitionist policy, even though it's supposed to be a 32 county All Ireland party. When it comes to the mother and baby institutions, I mean, even the likes of Mary Lou McDonald have spoken at length. I mean, a lot of their ministers in the Oireachtas and the Dáil have spoken, been good advocates in the south for a lot of what's going on around the issues of the mother and babies institutions and the Magdalene laundries, industrial schools, etc., etc. But I mean,
even on the leak, she was vocal, wasn't she, Breda?
Yeah. But I mean, they've done absolutely next to nothing. And of course, they've been partners in government in the north for an extensive period of time, and they've basically sidled up in many cases. I mean, I know Michelle O'Neill told us at a meeting we had in June that she had signed off as Deputy Minister on the Adoption of Children's Bill.
Yeah.
We're trying to get brought in through legislation here, that the DUP have basically blocked since 2004. But I mean, on the face of it, they've been in power for a long time. They were part of the government that set up the HIA, that excluded the mother and baby institutional issues in the Magdalene laundries, and they've sat back and watched scoping exercises at various periods in 2014, 2016 be carried out, and they've done absolutely nothing. It took them a long time to set up the process we have now, and of course, any imminent state investigation that we're likely to have now on the back of this truth recovery process is potentially going to be absolutely thrown onto the back burner or even further down the list. If Stormont potentially collapses around the whole Brexit debacle. So, I mean, problem is, John, a lot of things we're talking about here, I mean, for some of us, religion is synonymous with dogma. I mean, that's how religion executes itself. I mean, it's all based on tyranny and oppression, and government do exactly the same. And we're facing this. Frank was talking a few minutes ago about what we're effectively talking about here is other people making decisions for you, and everybody else knows what's best for you. This is an endemic phenomenon that we're facing in everything, through all sorts of institutions, through governance. I mean, this goes back to how babies and women in these institutions were looked after. I mean, the Catholic Church, is there any bigger, more patriarchal, misogynist organization, institution on the planet? I doubt it. I mean, some Saudi Arabians and et cetera, might argue that, but I mean, this is effectively what we're talking about here, and it's not going away. And in some respects, it looks like it's getting better. And on the facade is, in certain circumstances, it looks like it's getting better. But I mean, is it getting any better? That's another debate.
Yeah. So, Breda, do you hold out hope then for Sinn Féin-led government being any different than a Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil-led?
I think, really, I suppose I've become so disillusioned by politicians. I do know that Kathleen Funchion has behaved brilliantly and admirably in leading the committee and ensuring for the various legislation and various pieces of legislation that come before her and her committee, that at least it's looked at from the point of view, as Eunan's just said, from the survivors, from the families, from those affected, and that they look like they're taking that on board. But, it's like Keith Finnegan asked me on Galway Bay FM, after following the meeting with the minister, about it being positive, or we're hopeful. You have to be hopeful. Otherwise you just give up. But we're 7 years here. Yeah. And the reality is the government of the day are losing continuously because of being dishonest. And because right throughout for the last, since the industrial schools tribunal and investigation, they have always pitted everything, absolutely every piece of machinery the government has against the survivor. And nothing has changed on that. To think today that, you know, when I was contacted by a 44-year-old gentleman who I spoke about at the meeting, who was born obviously in a different institution and whose mother died within 2 years of his birth, and who now has a life-threatening condition, health condition, and who cannot get the information that he requires in order to, you know, to live. It's a life and death situation. And yet his mother's records. Now, the minister did write to us, and they did pass on the request to the SAR, the people who now hold the records, since they were handed over from the Commission of Investigation to the department. But, you know, anyone would think immediately that you would give the records this gentleman needs for his health. Okay, redact what you need to redact if you need to, but the records belong to him. And to think that they wouldn't hand them over immediately, like is, and do I think that'll change under Sinn Fein? Honestly, I think the bureaucrats in Leinster House, I think many of the decisions made by civil service, who are senior civil servants, who are reluctant to let go of documents, and who seem to think that they have this paternalism, or we know best, and you guys can't handle the truth, such as Noelle Brown being told that her records would go first to her GP, to name her GP, and he or she would decide whether or not she could have that information. I mean, it for a woman, you know, who's possibly 55, 60 years of age or whatever, like it's just unbelievable. It's mad stuff.
And Mary Lou was discussing the institutional burials bill. Now, I know there's a bit of irony with Sinn Fein and burials and whatnot, but why is she not supporting a coroner led, you know, what we were talking about, the ad nauseum probably, but would anybody have any idea? I mean, she seems to be, you know, happy enough for the institutional burial bill to go through, and, you know, there's no, I mean, when there is already an existing process there, why would she not suggest that? Frank, I don't know if you.
Yeah, Frank.
I don't know why she's not suggesting it, because I think it's actually a wider question than Mary Lou McDonald, because what I've done recently on behalf of the three of us is to update the compare and contrast document, which critically analyses the government's bill, but also has now critically analysed the joint committee that reported just in July. And on a personal basis, as a joint parliamentary committee, I think they're a little bit disappointing. They haven't flashed their teeth. Yes, they've made a few sort of corrective points, some of which is contained within our own draft bill. But when you have, say, for example, at the beginning of their documents, the committee waxing lyrical about whether it's a mass grave or a communal grave, you know you're in trouble. And I don't know whether it's the disease of groupthink. You know, they're all stuck there in the Dáil, and they're all hearing each other talk about it, but actually not really listening to what's going on outside, or indeed actually researching some of the key issues. So I think if there is a disappointment about what TDs are saying in response to the government's bill, I think it's as simple as groupthink. I actually think that it's, geez, you know, we've got to get this job out of the way because we've got so many other things to do. But, you know, as I think I've said many times, and I think I say it in the document that I prepped, is that many of these measures are going to lead to judicial reviews without end. And that surely is, they must recognise that I would say is not just an unintended consequence of their disengagement, it's an intended
It's their objective.
consequence. Yeah, you can't go through parliamentary life and just simply provide some kind of bland commentary about it. I'd be fair to the committee. They were critical of the bill, but did the criticism have teeth? No, I didn't think it did. So in the document prepared, you've got the government's position in the left-hand column, the committee's position in the right-hand column, and here we are, the Three Musketeers in the middle, and we're setting out what our views are. And
are there any TDs would stand beside the three of you? Are there any TDs who would?
There are some TDs. When I've circulated some of this stuff before, I think there's probably about 8, maybe 9 TDs who have offered support. Some of them have been more vocal in offering that support, but I appreciate that they have an awful lot of jobs on their desk. But I think it's a genuine support. But what would be really wonderful is if they took the Sally bill, the bill that the three of us drafted, and stood up in the Dáil and do what we have done, which is to take it point by point and pull it apart and say, this is wrong, that is wrong, this needs to be implemented, or indeed utilize the apparatus, the state apparatus, the laws and the organizations, the departments that can actually bring this forward. What struck me most about the committee's response was that they were still stuck on the idea of an agency coroner. No. How many more times do I have to say no? Use the coroners you've got, and instead of going down this road of an agency, which I think is going to create more problems.
What does that mean even? I mean, an agency coroner, what does it?
Well, again, I'm struggling with this, John, because on the one hand, the bill is great at talking about, and I think it probably takes up about 50% of the bill, talking about the agency, basically crippling whistleblowers and giving all these powers to the agency. But actually, when you look at the bill itself, the ministers have real power. They can decide whether something's going to be looked at or not. There's all sorts of restrictions in there. And in fairness, the committee, they weren't happy with the restrictions. And neither am I. But the one solid restriction which they were silent on, which stands out, it's under head 6, subsection 10, and it basically says, irrespective of all of these other restrictions, if it's in the government's view that memorialization is more appropriate, then nothing is going to happen on these sites.
So it must terribly bad, a lot of bad faith there, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a wonderful clause, that they've stuck in there, and I'm saying that from a legal point of view because the rest of the document is just full of intentions and aspirations, and there it is. It sits, stalking the entire bill, and giving some future minister who's looking at the public purse to say, right, you know what, lads, we can get out of this. I'm going to invoke this. Okay. And to heck with the judicial reviews that follow on from that.
Yeah, we have a really tough Attorney General, I think. I mean, whoever's advising, our current one anyway, is very, very tough.
Yeah, I think they should publish any Attorney General advice, John.
Yeah, they should.
Because we really have to critically examine. Otherwise, any minister, Taoiseach or Tánaiste, can come out and say, well, the Attorney General doesn't allow it. You know,
In Tuam, Breda, in Tuam, do local people just not say, look, come on, we've got to get these bodies up or these bones up? I mean, do they say that, or is there dismay at the fact that it's kind of like just there, you know? And
oh, sheer frustration, John. We met with the Gardaí at the Western Headquarter Division last Friday, and there were 2 families of the lost children. One had met previously. And, you know, I've amassed in 7 years a lot of documents. And they took the documents which were, you know, birth certs were applicable and a death cert. One didn't have a death cert, which, you know, leads us to believe that perhaps that child is overseas. So they took all of the documentation and they're photocopying, and we're meeting them again soon. But I do know that the Garda Commissioner wanted to investigate, you know, wanted to attract people like Frank and survivors and families to speak to them. And we're consciously doing that. Now, whether or not, and one of the gentlemen we spoke to, who was senior in the Gardaí, he had been at Tuam at the time when the excavations last took place. And I was listening to Niamh McCullough speak about the Kerry babies, you know, and she's not quite accessible to us. I really think that, again, and they've made this mistake many, many times, and I'm inclined to think that whatever administration comes in will do it precisely the same thing, will leave survivors and the families of the disappeared very much, you know, wanting communication and wanting to be part of that process, but being neglected time and again. And that's unfortunate, you know, but we will pursue every single avenue. And ultimately, when the government say, well, you didn't do this, we will show them that we have stepped up to the plate at every mark. And, you know, and we will continue to speak out. But unfortunately, we don't get enough avenues to speak out about what it's like on the ground fighting a mammoth battle.
Yeah. We need you in the Senate, Breda. Are you in?
Frank as well.
I can be a special representative, you know, for the diaspora. Yeah.
One that speaks the Catherine's job. That's what you want, isn't it?
Well, yes.
To be an envoy. It sounds great, doesn't it?
It'd be interesting, John. I was just going to say that if Sinn Fein did get into government, whether it's coalition or otherwise, whether they would actually go about ratifying the Convention on Enforced Disappearances, given the echoes of the conflict, because the Republic have signed up to that but never ratified it, and the UK have never signed up to it at all. So, I mean, every man and his dog knows what the repercussions would be in signing up to that convention, and what it would mean for all of these death and burial malpractices and the amount of people that have been so undignifiedly buried in whatever circumstances.
It's an absolutely brilliant point. You know,
I mean, far be it from me to get involved in Sinn Fein politics, but what I would say is that it's kind of likely that they're going to be in governments sometime in the near future. And I think that they've made an awful lot of noise about a lot of different things, and very powerfully and very effectively. And I think if they are going to get into power, they must have had this conversation already. That they're going to have to be seen to be delivering. Otherwise, it's going to be, you know, their term in office is going to be a one-trick pony.
Yeah, well, we've got to make them pledge an oath that they will do something. Frank, thanks so much for joining us, and Breda and Union. We just run out of time. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you next time, maybe next week.